The Maharil writes in his book of Minhagim. The Maharil is one of the earliest and perhaps most prominent author and source for Ashkenaz customs. Minhag kosher, it is an appropriate minhag. It's koya, to blow, Rish Chodesh Elul, from Rish Chodesh Elul, to blow shofar. Kedei la'arbiv hasatan, in order to confuse the satan. Ve'ein yodei amosei hadin, so he won't know when is the day of judgment. V'yikatreg, and come to and come to be mekatrig, to make to prosecute. To what's another word for mekatrig? Prosecute. All right, that's another word. And he then quotes from the Mahari Segal, which talks about when you're supposed to start. He says you're supposed to start on the Shachris of the first day of Rish Chodesh Elul. We'll get back to that. Why do you start from that day? Because Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain for 40 days, starting from 40 days, but he came down in Yom Kippur. So 40 days before Yom Kippur is the first day of Rish Chodesh Elul. And why do you blow shofar? He says, Dorosh Mari Segal, Kedaminon, as we say, Mishanichnas Elul Marbin B'tshuva. Right? Everybody's heard of Mishanichnas of Matin B'simcha. Everybody's heard of Mishanichnas Other Marbin B'simcha. Until I started preparing this class, I never heard of Mishanichnas Elul Marbin B'tshuva. When Elul comes in, you increase in tshuva.
What's the tune for that song?
That's Misha, yeah? Okay. Now, how do you know that Elul is a time for tshuva? Now, the truth is, if you look in Hilchas Tshuva in the Rambam, what does the Rambam say? When is the time of the year for tshuva? So the Rambam says every day you could do tshuva. But there's one time of the year that is specially designated for tshuva. What's the time that the Rambam says? Says tshuva, the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yeah. There's no mention about Elul being a time of tshuva not in Chazal, I don't believe, and not in the Rambam.
The king's in the field, right?
Or the king in the field certainly doesn't come from Chazal and the Rambam. The first source for the king in the field, at least in that variation of it, as far as I know, is the Alter Rebbe. Yeah. So that's, in the scheme of things, very recent. But he goes on to say, V'smach l'davar, a support for this idea that when Elul comes in, it's a time for Teshuvah, is from the pasuk Mol Hashem es lekecha es levavcha es levav zarecha, which is a pasuk in Parshas Netzavim, which is talking about Teshuvah, and over there it says that Hashem will, quote, circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your children. So if you take 4 of those words, as levavcha es levav zarecha, again, your hearts and the hearts of your children, and again the context is the mitzvah of Teshuvah, it spells out Elul. Es levavcha ve'es levav is the letters of Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed, which spells out Elul. And he says, therefore we blow the shofar to remind people to do Teshuvah. And then he also brings a mashal of a king, not the mashal that we know about the king in the field, but a different mashal. And he says, mashal lemelech, this is like a king, when he comes to lay siege to a city. So what does a king do when he lays siege to a city? It seems like he's saying that when he blows shofar, to say, oh, here I'm coming, and he's going to make the people, the city upon which he is laying siege, he's going to make them scared by sounding the shofar. And indeed, yesterday in Parshas Shoftim, when it talks about going to battle, so the Torah talks about all the things you shouldn't be afraid of, and Rashi brings from Chazal, what are all the things that enemy armies do to make you afraid? So it says they bring horses to make noise, and one of the things is that they make noise with shofaros, with horns, to make the people, the enemy, so the enemy coming upon you is blowing a shofar to make you scared. And then the Maharil continues, and it all seems to be in the name of the Mahari Segal, somebody who's watching from a watchtower, when he sees soldiers coming al-ir, they sound truas and tkiyas, they sound these sounds of the horns, to warn the people to stand guard. So it seems like in the context of battle, you have shofars coming from both sides. The enemy coming to lay siege to your city is going to blow shofar to make you scared, and also your own watchmen are going to blow shofar to remind you to stay on your watch and be ready to defend yourself. So, if we're to summarize everything we've seen over here, why are we blowing shofar? from Rosh Chodesh Elul. So he said it's to confuse the Satan, so he shouldn't know when is the time to prosecute. He said that it's got to do with Marbim B'Tshuva, that it's a time of Tshuva and the shofar arouses to Teshuvah, and the idea of a king coming to battle, something to do with making us aware, just like the sound of the shofar in the context of battle. He doesn't sort of fine-tune exactly what the purpose of it is. Now, this is the way it is in the Maharil, yes? You want to
I was going to say, it's not related necessarily, but it's like the Civil War. Both the Confederacy and Union approaching each other, each blowing, their horns.
Okay. So, the earliest source for blowing shofar actually comes from the full Maharil. I started with the Maharil because I liked, and some of them we're going to get back to, I liked his idea of Mishanichnas Elul Marabim B'Tshuva, I liked the Mashal of the King, I liked the way he phrased the confusing of the Satan, which we're going to get back to. But before we get back to that and unpack it, let's go back to the earliest source. The earliest source for blowing shofar in Elul is from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu is often attributed to Rabbi Eliyahu ben Hurkanes. I believe it's not clear whether Rabbi Eliyahu ben Hurkanes is actually the author of it, but be that as it may, it's the earliest source, and he is quoted by the Torah in the first chapter of Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, Siman Tov Kuf Pei Aleph.
It's a sefer?
Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu is a sefer, yeah. So the Torah starts off Tani Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu. On Rosh Chodesh Elul, he says, Hashem told Moshe, "Come up to me to the mountain." Now, this we also saw. I'm sorry. The Maharil also mentions the 40 days. I think I referenced that briefly, right? The Rosh Chodesh. So he says Moshe went up to the mountain the third time. Moshe was on the mountain 3 times. Each time was for 40 days. The third time starts in Rosh Chodesh Elul, and the Maharil says, the Pirkei de Rabbi says that when Moshe went up the third time, they sounded a shofar in the morning. Why did they sound the shofar? Because last time he went up, the first time, it didn't work out so well. Everybody went after Avodah Zarah. Mm-hmm. So now they blew shofar to tell people this time, make sure you don't get sidetracked by Avodah Zarah. So, and Hashem is elevated through that sounding of the shofar, as the pasuk says, Allah likim b'sruah, Hashem was elevated through the sound of a shofar. He doesn't say what it means Hashem is elevated, but I think on a very simple level, the fact that we are ensuring that the people shouldn't do Avodah Zarah, that is God being elevated, okay. And he says, therefore Chazal instituted, and this is important because the words are precise, a takana of Chazal, there's things that we do as a takana of Chazal is much stronger than a minhag, right? Eruv Tafshilin is a takana of Chazal, yeah? Not eating a brux is a minhag, yeah? So, he says there's a takana of Chazal to blow the shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul every year. Now the Torah continues, and it seems like the Torah might be continuing to quote a version, an edition of the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu that he had. But in the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliyahu that we have, that's the end of the quote. That's all he says, that there's a takana to blow shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul, on the first day of Elul. Whether he means the 30th of Av or the 1st of Elul, we'll get to that. But that's the takana, to blow shofar once. But we're adding that the minhag also became to blow shofar the whole month. The rest of the month as well. To warn the Jewish people to do teshuvah. The pasuk says, "Can the shofar be sounded in the city and the people not tremble?" Now, in the context of Pshuti Shel Mikra, I think what it means is, like we said before, what does shofar in the city have to do with anything? Shofar in the city means there's trouble coming, right? But we borrow that to mean that the sound of the shofar actually arouses us to do teshuvah. And that's why, because Elul is a time of Teshuvah, because of Eslevavcha v'Eslavav Zarecha, and I think the Bach also brings in Ani L'doi Dividoi Dili, and it's the 4, and Ani L'doi Dividoi Dili, what's the connection to Teshuvah? Because Ani L'doi Dividoi Dili, the last 4 letters are Yud. 4 times Yud, Yud is 10, 4 times Yud is 40, so that means that the 40 days are connected to Teshuvah. Anyway, the bottom line is it's a time of tshuva, so we sound the shofar to remind us of tshuva. And then the Torah adds in again another thing, which we've already seen, kedela arbev hasatan, to confuse the Satan. V'chein noyagim b'Ashkenaz, this is indeed the minhag in Ashkenaz, l'tkoya b'chol boker erev v'erev achat tefillah, to blow the shofar every morning and evening, boiker erev, morning and evening, after prayer. And then the Torah goes on to say that in some communities they start saying slichas from the beginning of Elul, and that pretty much became the divide. That the Sephardim, they got up every morning at 5 whatever to say slichas from the beginning of Elul all the way through Yom Kippur. And Ashkenazim said, we don't need to get up and say slichas, we'll just blow shofar, that's good for us. And we say slichas just for a few days before Rosh Hashanah, and most Ashkenazim continue all the way through Yom Kippur.
Right, I was going to say.
Generally not at night. Right, we do it during during the day, but we don't have the practice of doing it.
Oh, now what about blowing shofar at night? Very good. So, Lamaisa, it's not clear to me. In all the early Ashkenazi sources for blowing shofar, it talks about blowing shofar morning and evening. To my knowledge, the only communities who maintain the minhag of blowing shofar in the morning and the evening are the Yakas, who are the the Western German Kehillas, who they really, Western Ashkenaz Kehillas, who they really maintain minhag Ashkenaz. It's not clear to me why most Ashkenazim only blow shofar in the morning, or where that even comes from. And with the way it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah also says to blow morning and evening. But record that it's not practiced. I mentioned already last week, I think, that often we see in the Aruch HaShulchan, the minhag, he matches with Chabad minhag, not because he had any connection to Chabad, but because he was Russian. And over there also in the Aruch HaShulchan, he says, I've never seen anybody blow shofar in the evening. So clearly in the more eastern Ashkenaz regions, the minhag never took hold of blowing in the evening, only in the morning. Again, I haven't sort of seen anybody successfully trace down exactly how and where and why people stopped blowing it in the evening and only blow shofar in the morning, but that seems to be the practice. The practice is specifically the way it's recorded by the Torah, is Acharat Tefillah, after davening. I should mention that there is some discussion about what happens if you didn't daven with the minyan, or you davened with the minyan and you had to leave early and you didn't hear shofar. Is there any inyan? Is there any purpose or value? Are you supposed to blow shofar yourself later on during the day? And the contemporary poskim discussed this. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg in Tzitz Eliezer Chelik Yud Beis, I believe, volume 12, has a tshuva where he says, no, I've never seen anybody blowing shofar by themselves, even if for whatever reason they didn't daven with the minyan. And he goes on to say that if you look at the reasons, he says, for example, the first reason is that when Moshe went up to the mountain, where did they blow the shofar? B'machana, in the camp. They blew shofar for the whole Jewish people. And he goes on to say that really there's no idea, that the whole minhag is specifically to do it, that the minyan, that the tzibur should blow shofar. Perhaps it's even alluded to in the words of the Torah, Acharat Tefillah, after the prayer, meaning after the minyan. Lemaisa, I think certainly in Chabad, I'm not sure if it's not an official Chabad custom, but certainly in Chabad it would be customary to blow shofar in Elul, even if you were davening without a minyan, or if you missed it, to try and make it up. Although I'm not sure do you have to blow for the women also? I don't know. I think in the Chabad Chadorah, maybe they blow shofar for the girls, and maybe some Chabad individuals will blow shofar for their family, for their wife and children when they come home. But certainly there's no official minhag to blow shofar for women. The minhag is to blow shofar in shul after Shacharis. So I'm saying I know that that people do it, but I don't know I'm not sure. I'm not saying I haven't researched it. I don't know, and I think in Chabad it's probably more than it is in other circles. One thing it then extends to sort of all sorts of other things, which personally rub me the wrong way. I find the whole the whole custom that some people have, there's a chuppah in Elul, they'll blow shofar at the chuppah. To me, that's what are you doing? Why are you inventing new minhagim? There's no mitzvah, there's no minhag. To me, it's just I cringe when I experience those type of things. But that's just me. To each their own. I'm not saying that you're not allowed to do it. It doesn't. To me, that's not part of the minhag. The minhag is to blow shofar after davening. If you miss davening, you couldn't daven the minyan, so you blow shofar for yourself, to sort of make a whole campaign about hearing shofar and blowing shofar for people in Elul. Again, to me, it just rubs me the wrong way, but whatever.
I'm not. Go to the hospitals and blow it for people.
Yeah,
during Elul?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But, okay, fine. People can do whatever they want. It's a free country.
To some extent, you could understand going down that path and trying to do it as much as possible, because the whole purpose is to be ma'arer b'tshuva. And shofar somehow.
There's also, to me, there's a difference between an individual. You're going to visit somebody in a hospital. It's a meaningful thing.
Yeah.
to blow shofar for him. I think of all those things, the blowing it by a chuppah really is the one that most rubs me the wrong way, because a chuppah is a time when there's very clear minhagim of what you do by a chuppah, and to start adding rituals that are not part of the rituals that Klal Yisrael do by chuppahs, to me that's already...
No, but I was referring to the practices of, let's say somebody, for whatever reason, misses the end of davening and then decides later. I can understand why anybody...
I could even understand blowing it for kids in school. I think that's really cute. You get the kids into the mode of Rosh Hashanah, like that's really nice. I don't know that I personally would do it, but it doesn't disturb me. I think the one that disturb is a strong word, but I think the one that really sort of like, what are you doing, is when you're at a chuppah and suddenly like blowing shofar, like what are you doing? Like that's not part of the seder of a chuppah.
I saw it one time blowing at a chuppah, but it wasn't an Elul.
Oh, in fact, a dear rabbi friend of yours, who I'm not going to say his name because it's on record, and then we're going to get thousands of views online. But he's a rabbi who's close to you, who's a kohen. I was once standing next to him at a chuppah, and they called him up to do birchas kohenim, and he just made a face to me, and he did not go up. And he was like, well, "What's this mission? Like you're just adding new things, So fine. So that became this sort of cutesy little thing. I don't know. Whatever. Okay, fine. Let's move on. I'm going to England tonight, so I have an idea to take in London. There's a very prominent Yekish shul. It's called Monks, and over there they blow shofar after Mincha Ma'ariv in the evening. So I'm thinking maybe of taking them there just to have the. They also, it's interesting how they do it. They blow. First of all, the Yekish Shvarim Teruah. You're saying you're donating to the breakfast class. I hear everybody should donate lots of money to cover
you have to take it to.
First, we have to cover the cost of the breakfast class. So the Yekas, they do an interesting shvarim and teruah, which is different. Like within the Yekas gufa, there's different. Some people do tkiya flat notes. Some of them do a tkiya flat, like two flat notes, like a low note and a high one. And the shvarim is similar to the Chabad one a bit, like it goes very wavy, and then the Trua is more like some of the Sfaradim also do, I think, like one long, it's not like tu, it's one long note, but it's wavy, the same, right? But they blow, so how many sounds do you sound? So in Chabad, for example, and some other Chassidim, we blow 10 sounds in Elul. Tkiya, Shvarim, Teruah, Tkiya, Tkiya, Shvarim, Tkiya, Tkiya, Teruah, Tkiya. Most Ashkenazim just blow 4 sounds, Tkiya, Shvarim, Teruah, Tkiya. But the Yekas blow 12. They do Tkiya, Shvarim, Teruah, Tkiya 4 times in Elul. Anyway, let's get back to the meat of the sugya. So, okay, with blow shofar after Elul. Now, the Torah said a few things, and the way the Mefarshim understand it is that let's do something else first. Let's get into the Arbev HaSatan. What does it mean to confuse the Satan? So the Torah just said straight out to confuse the Satan. He didn't say any more than that. In the Maharil we saw the language was Arbev HaSatan, to confuse the Satan. He shouldn't know when is the day of judgment. The Bach says like this. He says, why is the Torah adding a new reason? You've already told me, blow shofar. Why? Because shofar arouses people to tshuva. Elul is a time of tshuva. So blow shofar. Why do you need to add another reason to confuse the Satan? Says the Bach, I'll tell you why. Because if the reason to blow shofar was only because you have to do tshuva, so why are you stopping before Rosh Hashanah? Continue all the way through Yom Kippur. In Kippur, there's a tender fakert. The fact that Elul is a time of tshuva, that's the chiddush. The tender asaris me tshuva, that's already in the Gemara that's a time of tshuva. So if you're going to blow shofar in Elul to arouse people to tshuva, so how much more so should you blow shofar during the asaris me tshuva to arouse people to tshuva? And by the way, those we're going to see later the discussion. When do you start? In the first day of Rosh Chodesh or the second day of Rosh Chodesh? Because of the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain. Well, the 40 days goes all the way to the Yom Kippur. It doesn't stop for Rosh Hashanah. Says the Bach, that's why the Torah adds the reason to confuse the Satan. Because you're trying to confuse the Satan not to know when Rosh Hashanah is. Right? So therefore, once Rosh Hashanah is passed, now whatever, mission accomplished. There's no need to confuse him anymore because Rosh Hashanah is past already. So, I mean, there's a big problem with the Bach because so what? That if you're telling me there's two reasons, one is to arouse you to do tshuva, the other is to confuse the Satan. So now that Rosh Hashanah is past, you no longer need to confuse the Satan. Yeah, but you still need to do tshuva. So why are you not blowing the shofar? Why, one reason is not good enough? I don't know. Whatever.
Yom Kippur is also.
What?
Yom Kippur, you could. They don't want to. What do you call it? Confuse the sun for Yom Kippur.
Yeah, well,
That's
another interesting thing we don't find. It's a good point. Well, there's many minhagim. We'll talk about more of them soon. There's many minhagim that we do that are to confuse the Satan, and they're all connected to Rosh Hashanah. We don't find any minhagim confuse the Satan in relation to Yom Kippur, even though Yom Kippur is also a day of judgment. Rosh Hashanah Yechasevon, or Yom Kippur Yechasevon. You're inscribed in Yom Kippur, sealed on Rosh Hashanah, is sealed on Yom Kippur. So why is there none of that? Why are we not confusing Yom Kippur? So that remains a little bit ambiguous. But one thing that is clear from the Bach and from the Maharil, that they understand the concept is that we're trying to confuse the Satan not to know when Rosh Hashanah is. How does blowing the shofar confuse him and not let him know when Rosh Hashanah is? Neither of them spell that out. But somehow blowing shofar in Elul confuses the Satan so as not to know when Rosh Hashanah is.
I think judgment occurs during Elul too.
Oh, 1 second, you're jumping the gun. We're going to get there. But I want to point out, okay, so on a very basic level, you could say that if you blow shofar every day, how does the Satan knows how to identify Rosh Hashanah when he hears shofar? If he hears shofar every day, he doesn't know which day is the real day. Okay.
So you're telling me he goes every day to court, and then about 30 days into it, he decides, I'm exhausted, I'm not going to court that day.
Right. So, but the thing is that if you start thinking of the Satan in such sort of terms, you could really turn the whole thing on its head. And indeed, we find. I see Rabbi Gedalia Oberlander in his Sefer Minhag Avosenu B'Yodenu, he brings from Kisvei Ashkenazi, he brings something that he found somewhere. I didn't have a chance to sort of trace his source for this. That there was a certain Ashkenazi leader, Rabbi Moshe Milutra, again I didn't have time to search who this person is, that he was very upset that people blew shofar during Elul. And he would say, hey Margilin l'Satan, they get the Satan used to not be confused by the sound of the shofar because he's so used to hearing it. So it sounds like Ramosha Milutra understands the concept of confusing the Satan, that it's literally the loud noise that's giving him a headache and he can't concentrate on prosecuting. But if you're going to blow shofar for a whole month before, then he's already used to the noise. It's like my wife, she could just do anything even though the kids are jumping all over her because she's used to it, right? So if you blow shofar for the whole Elul, so then you're not. Then the Satan's going to be, by the time comes Rosh Hashanah, he's going to be used to the noise, right? It says and then you have on sort of the other side of that same coin, you have in the Sefer Minhagim Debei Maharam from the Minhag of Rhinus, the Rhineland of Rosh Hashanah. He says, "Oh, you stop blowing shofar a few days before." Our minhag is we don't blow shofar on the day before Rosh Hashanah, yeah. But he brings to stop 3 days before. He says, why? Because if you blow for 30 days, then the Satan's going to get used to the noise. Right. So if you stop for a few days, and then you blow shofar again on Rosh Hashanah, so again the noise gives him a headache, and now he can't be mekatruk. So this is an approach to confusing the Satan that we certainly find in very prominent sources, but I think it's difficult to understand. It's difficult. The Satan is like a fool, and he doesn't like it. The whole thing.
For it every year.
Yeah, it seems so. We need to find we certainly need to find some deeper meaning.
That's his kryptonite.
Well, the Satan
We certainly-
is Yetzer Hara, right?
The Satan is the Yetzer Hara. Very good. What?
It's within every one of us.
Oh, very good. So you're onto something. But mechanisch metornisch jumping the gun. You can't jump the gun. Okay? So now, the truth is,
English word is gun.
there is a. Do you know how you say gun in Yiddish?
No idea.
A gun in Yiddish, well, there's a word for a gun, a bix, but usually people refer to a gun as a klei mashches, a destructive thing, which goes to prove the point that I've said many times that gun culture is anti-Jewish. I'm not saying to have a gun is not Jewish, but gun culture is anti-Jewish. Jews consider gun to be a destructive thing that we want nothing to do with. If you're in a situation where you're compelled to have a gun, then fine, whatever, I'm not getting into that. But the gun culture, which is very prevalent in this country, is something which is very not Jewish. And as we spoke last Sunday, that even if you believe something to be neutral, just the fact that the goyim are doing it makes it goyish. So
If it's just a tool for a purpose.
there is a
then
tool
you-
for a purpose, and then if you have that purpose, then you use that tool.
Right.
But if it becomes, if you're part of this culture where you own them and you collect them and you talk about your rights to them and all of these things, to me, then the naysayers will say that's just because I'm from England, but
Just go get a gun, and that's it.
You only need one.
all right.
45.
Now, the truth is that already in the very classic commentaries, we find a very different approach to confusing the Satan. I'm going to work my way backwards a bit. First of all, here in the Torah, you have the Prisha. The Prisha here on the Torah right away says, what's the idea of confusing the Satan? Because if the Satan sees that we want to confuse the Satan because it's a time teshuvah, we want to do teshuvah, and we don't want the Satan to stop us from doing teshuvah. So he doesn't sort of say exactly how it works, but it's clear already in the Prisha that the point over here is not to confuse the Satan, so you shouldn't know when Rosh Hashanah is. He is talking more along lines of what David Huda is saying, that the Satan is the Yetzer Hara, and the Yetzer Hara wants to stop you from doing teshuvah. So in a time when, any day we don't like the Yetzer Hara, but in a time of the year such as now in Elul, when we're extra focused on doing teshuvah, then it's even more important that we make sure the Yetzer Hara doesn't get in our way. So we want to confuse him so that not necessarily you should know what day on the calendar it is. We want to confuse him so that he should not get in our way of doing teshuvah. He, as in the Yetzer Hara, in other words, we're not talking here about a Satan who's some angel on high going to be mekatrig and to prosecute us in the court in front of God. We're talking about my personal Yetzer Hara who's going to get in the way of me doing teshuvah, and we're trying to stop, to keep him away. Again,
Somehow
he doesn't
confusing
say,
keeps him away.
right, exactly, he doesn't say how it works, right? Now, in Tosfos, in Tosfos you have like this. Tosfos says like this. What does it mean? Okay, we should really go. We have to, in order to introduce Tosfos, we have to go back a stage. The notion of confusing the Satan. I think we've all heard of it. Yeah, it's not the first time you've heard confusing the Satan. What are the things that we do to confuse the Satan? Okay, so we've seen that we blow shofar and Elul to confuse the Satan. We'll see also we don't blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. One of the reasons given for that is not to confuse the Satan. We do not bless the month of Tishrei to confuse the Satan, because we want the Satan not to know when Rosh Hashanah is. So when you bless the month, you say, Rosh Chodesh is on this and this day. Oh, he's going to know. It's just our secret. Right?
We don't do Mevarchim HaChodesh.
Right.
For when Tishrei comes.
Yes, there's no
I
Shabbos.
thought that was because of that Hashem does it for that.
That's the... See, this is why it's always important. You have to know what's the pshat and what's the drush. The pshat is we don't bless Rosh Chodesh because La'arbi Vasat. And then comes a Chassidish Avart, which I believe it comes from the Frierdiker Rebbe, maybe a little bit earlier, that on Rosh Hashanah we don't bless the month because Hashem blesses the month, and then with that koyach we bless the month the rest of the year. That's the Chassidish Avart that goes after you know the pshat, then you know the drush. Okay. Now, also on Rosh Hashanah in davening, so every Rosh Chodesh, what happened in the Beis HaMikdash on Rosh Hashanah? They brought the sacrifices for Rosh Hashanah, and they also brought the sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh because it's the first of the month. It's the first of the month, and it's the first of the year. In our davening on Rosh Hashanah, any reference to the sacrifices of the first of the month are a very vague reference. We don't say it explicitly. Why? Because as soon as you tell the Satan, no, it's Rosh Chodesh today, he's going to, if it's Rosh Chodesh, 1 second, it's Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, that's Rosh Hashanah, then he's going to know, right? So somehow everything else we do on Rosh Hashanah doesn't give him the clue, but mentioning Rosh Chodesh, that's the thing that confuses him, right? One more thing is that when do we finish the Torah? So we should finish it at the end of the year. It would be perfect. The Shabbos for Rosh Hashanah, you should finish V'zois HaBracha. The next Shabbos, you start Bereshis. No, we don't do it. Why? Because if you're going to finish the Torah, then the Satan's going to get wind of the fact that it's coming to the end of the year, and he's going to pay close attention to figure out when Rosh Hashanah is, right? So those are the different minhagim. However, from all those minhagim, and some of them we'll get back to, from all those minhagim, there's one thing in the Gemara. All of these are sourced much later. There's one thing in the Gemara that says that we do to confuse the Satan. You know what that is? The mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah to blow shofar is to blow shofar during Musaf. I'll say the habrachas. In other words, the way you're supposed to do the mitzvah is, Musaf has the three middle brachas of Musaf on Rosh Hashanah: Malchus, Zechronus, and Shofar. King, about kingship, about remembrance, and about shofar. And you're supposed to blow shofar for each of those three, right? And that's in fact what we do. We blow the shofar during the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah. But we also blow shofar before the Amidah, before Musaf, right?
Right before.
The way we do it is we blow shofar, and then we start Musaf, and we blow shofar again during Musaf. Why do you blow shofar before, and why do you do it twice? Says the Gemara, to confuse the Satan. How is that confusing the Satan? So we're going to say three Perushim, in kind of in a backwards order, but that's just what it feels like presenting it right now. The Sefer HaTanya, not the Alter Rebbe, the early Tanya, one of the Rishonim, he writes that when you blow the shofar is the horn of a ram. That reminds us of
the
Akedah.
Right.
Oh, what happened by the Akedah? Hashem tells Avram to go and take his son to the Akedah. What does the Satan try to do? He tries to stop him and tries to tell Avram not to do it. Were his efforts successful? No, they were not. So you blow shofar before Musaf to confuse the Satan, because as soon as you blow shofar, the Satan realizes, hey, remember that Akedah thing when I tried to get involved and it didn't work? I might as well not even try anymore.
Wow.
Right? It's what the Eli Rabbah brings. So again, the Eli Rabbah's approach is basically it's not the same sort of what we might call primitive. I don't want to use that word really, because there's Gedolei Rishonim who speak about it in those terms, but I think to our minds it does come across a little bit primitive to sort of confuse the Satan, so you shouldn't know what day of the week it is. So he doesn't go there, the Eli Rabbah, the Tanya, but he's saying that you're basically overwhelming this. You're confusing the Satan. In other words, you're bringing to fore the Satan's sort of self-doubt, where am I even going to be successful in being Mekatrik? It didn't work when I tried with Avraham Avinu, so it's not going to work now either. Similar thing. You have in Tosfos. Tosfos brings from the Aruch, and the truth is it's based on the Yerushalmi. The Satan knows that come Mashiach, what happens when Mashiach comes?
No more Satan.
Satan goes bye-bye, right? Any of you people who may have once heard of or even attended Nishtagadacht, a non-Chabad Seder, might have heard a song called Chad Gadya. Have you ever heard of Chad Gadya?
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone, tell anyone. So what happens at the end of Chad Gadya? Hashem slaughters the Malach HaMavis, right? So come Mashiach, there's no more Malach HaMavis. What's the call? What's the sound that heralds the coming of Mashiach? The shofar. Who you talk about? We say every day in Namidah, the Kabbalah Shofar Gadol. You talk about Shofar Gadol. So you sound the shofar. Now, when the Satan hears the shofar, if he just hears it once, he gets a little bit overwhelmed. If he hears it twice, now he's going to be, oh my gosh, my time has come. I better pack my bags and run and hide in my little corner. Right? So that's why it says Tosfos. That's what the Gemara means, that you blow shofar twice, once during Musaf, once before Musaf, because by blowing it twice, the Satan is really convinced that his time is up and he's not going to come and be Mekatrik. Right? Okay, that's Tosfos. Again, in many senses similar to what we've seen until now. We're like using this sort of trick, not to confuse him so he shouldn't know what day it is, but trick him into being distracted into doing something else rather than stopping us doing teshuvah, and rather than trying to present his case against us in the Beis Din Shel Ma'ila.
The answers we're hearing now is more you're trying to disarm him.
Disarm him, exactly. Rashi says something different. Rashi says something like this. Rashi says that, and my problem is that I didn't copy and paste the text of Rashi here. So I'm going to paraphrase. Rashi says, no, it's not. It's Rashi in Gemara. It's fine. Rashi says that when the Satan sees that the Jewish people are passionate about the mitzvahs, mistat min ta'anoisa, his claims become silenced. In other words, what's the Satan trying to do on Rosh Hashanah to be mekatrik? He's trying to come to the heavenly court, and he's trying to say the Jews they're not sincere. They don't really care about the mitzvahs. They're not really devoted to doing things right, and so we might as well not inscribe them in the book of life, right? So what do? We go and prove him wrong. We're not interacting with the Satan to try and sort of directly confuse him or disarm him. We're going straight to God. We're saying, God, we're showing you we're showing you that we are passionate about the mitzvahs. How do you express that you're passionate about the mitzvahs? Well, one way of doing it is by, I'm not even going to wait till Musaf to blow shofar. The first opportunity I have, even before Musaf, I'm going to blow shofar right away. That's how passionate I am about doing your mitzvahs. Right? Oh, now, you've silenced the Satan, because what's the Satan going to do? He's going to come and say that the Jews don't care about the mitzvahs. You've just proven him wrong. So essentially, we have really two approaches to confusing the Satan so far. One approach is, like Ari said, you're disarming him. And within that, we had different people saying it differently. And then you have, let's call it the approach of Rashi, that is, you're not disarming him, you're basically refuting his claim. You're saying, exactly, actions speak louder than words. What do you mean on that part? And the Rebbe has an approach to confusing the Satan, which brings everything together neatly. And one of the things I like about the Rebbe's approach is, besides the fact that it resonates and it's something which is meaningful and makes sense, it also brings it all together. It synthesizes between the different approaches, bringing them together nicely. And this, Rick, you mentioned this before, perhaps as a judgment before Rosh Hashanah. A person, Rosh Hashanah is the inscription, the day of judgment, but already the time of Elul is leading up to the time of judgment. And if a person can accomplish so much through his avodas Hashem in the time of Elul, that come Rosh Hashanah, he's not even a risk. He's won the case before it even started, right? Any lawyers around the table? Is there such an idea that you come to court and it's just a formality because you've already won the case before the case starts?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So, if we really devote ourselves to avodas Hashem in a real way in Elul, Rosh Hashanah is just a formality. You've already won the case. And we find, the Rebbe points, that we find this idea even in Halacha, that one of the customs for before Rosh Hashanah is you're supposed to have a haircut. Why do you have a haircut? Haircut is, you're showing you're celebrating. Why are you celebrating before Rosh Hashanah? Because you're already confident, you're perfectly confident that you've won the case. Says the Rebbe, if you look at the Maharil, he doesn't say that he won't know what day Rosh Hashanah is. He knows what's printed on the calendar. He says he won't know when is the judgment. He won't know because you're doing tshuva the whole Elul. So let's start with the first. We'll get to other examples soon. But let's start with the first thing. You're blowing shofar in Elul to confuse the Satan, and you're blowing shofar. We say two things. The Torah says you're blowing shofar in Elul to do teshuva, to arouse you to teshuva, and you're blowing shofar in Elul to confuse the Satan. That's the same thing. The fact that I'm aroused to teshuva during Elul,
Right.
that confuses the Satan, because the Satan is not going to know when is Rosh Hashanah. In other words, he's not going to know when is the pivotal day of judgment, because I've already done Teshuvah. Comes Rosh Hashanah, it's just the court case of Rosh Hashanah is, so to speak, just a formality. It's too late for him to be Mekater because I'm already signed and sealed.
A favorable judgment.
Right, exactly. Now, that's step number one. So step number one, again, it's a beautiful thing. It's, first of all, it's something that's meaningful and resonates and arouses us to actually take the time of Elul and use it to its fullest. And also it brings it together. In other words, we're saying all these things about disarming the Satan don't mean in this sort of primitive way. It means that you can, in effect, win the court, being already destined to be sealed in the book of life, already earlier in the month of Elul. And so that's what it means to confuse the Satan, not to know when it is. But how does this help us for all the other things that I said? For example, you don't bless the month. You don't bless Rosh Chodesh. You don't say the tefillas of Rosh Chodesh. You don't blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. How is all of that helping you? How is all of that helping you do teshuvah? In other words, if the point is, the way the Rebbe's approach is, when you say you're confusing the Satan, it means like what Rashi said. Rashi says you're showing the Satan that you're showing Hashem that you're passionate about mitzvahs. Mm-hmm. So, in a similar vein, we're blowing shofar the whole month of Elul to do teshuvah, because when I do teshuvah, then the Satan has nothing. I've won the case already. Okay, that's when I'm doing teshuvah. But how does not blowing shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah help? And how does not talking about Rosh Chodesh? So the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe says that what's the B'chal, when you mention, for example, Rosh Chodesh, and also it's weird, right? On Rosh Hashanah, you talk about the karbonis of Rosh Hashanah in the Musaf. You bring the karbonis of Rosh Hashanah. So you've said that it's Rosh Hashanah. Oh, but by not saying it's Rosh Chodesh, that's going to confuse the Sultan. What does that even mean?
It is both, right?
Right.
If it's Rosh Hashanah, it's also going to be Rosh Chodesh. And what, the Sultan's not going to figure out that the day that Rosh Hashanah falls out is also the day that Rosh Chodesh falls out?
What is Rosh Chodesh all about? Rosh Chodeshim, what's the next word? Mechapara. Rosh Chodesh is for atonement. So when we talk about Rosh Chodesh, when we bless the months of Rosh Chodesh, when we say the karbanis of Rosh Chodesh, we're reminded, we're doing this, Hashem is giving us atonement. That gives us chizuk in our avodas Hashem. When we don't mention it, we're lacking that chizuk. So we're lacking the chizuk of blowing shofar and Rosh Hashanah. We're lacking the chizuk of blessing the month of Rosh Chodesh. We're lacking the chizuk of mentioning Rosh Chodesh in that thing. We're lacking the chizuk of finishing the Torah before Rosh Hashanah and saying chazak chazak for this chazak's sake and being reminded. So what does that help us? Why is lacking all these elements of chizuk going to confuse the Satan? Says the Rebbe, a beautiful part, and this touches on what we mentioned. A story. Now, it's a story of the Rebbe Rashab, and I love this story because there's many stories of tzaddikim and rabbeim. Somebody came to the Rebbe and he asked for a bracha, and it was a miracle, and the Rebbe's bracha was mukuyim, and they lived happily ever after, and it's great, and it's truly great. Like I'm not in any way diminishing that, but I think the Rebbe teaches us that we're not just here to tell wonderful stories about tzaddikim. We need to work hard ourselves, and this is a story that reminds us that in tandem with the bracha of the tzaddik, you need to work hard. The story goes like this. To set the historical stage, the Rebbe Maharash passes away in what year, Emmanuel? Tov Reish Mem Beis. What's Tov Reish Mem Beis? Is 1882, yes? But it's Tishrei, so it's 1881, I think. So it's in the make about sense, 1881, I believe, the Rebbe Maharash passes away. The Rebbe Maharash had at the time, I think originally might have had another child. At the time there were 3 children, but there were 2 who were living in Lubavitch. There was his youngest son, who was the Reb Shalom Ber, who became the Rebbe Rashab, and his oldest son was Reb Zalman Aaron. Now, the Rebbe Rashab didn't officially become Rebbe for another 10 years, but there was, and Reb Zalman Aaron then moved away to Vitebsk, which is, I think, basically the closest, quote-unquote, big city to Lubavitch. But at least initially, they were sort of somewhat both involved in. Neither of them were really Rebbes as such, but they were both sort of filling in for their father. They were keeping Lubavitch. They were caretaking for Lubavitch. The Rebbe had passed away, but Lubavitch, the Hoif, the Chotzer, the court of Lubavitch was still in Lubavitch, and so they were. So somebody comes to the Rebbe Rashab with a problem. I don't remember what the problem was. I don't even remember if the story says what the problem was, and I just forgot, or maybe it just doesn't say what the problem was. But he came to the Rebbe Rashab and he comes to ask for a bracha, and the Rebbe Rashab tells him, "Sorry, I can't help you." And so the man leaves the Rebbe Rashab, and he is absolutely distraught, and he's bawling his eyes out, and the Razah, the Rebbe Rashab's brother, sees him and he says, "What's going on? Why are you so distraught?" So he says, "I just went into your brother. I need to ask for a bracha from the Rebbe," and he says, "Can't help you." So Rabbi Zalman Aaron says, and he says to Rabbi Zalman Aaron, "This was my last hope, the last straw I was going to try. I was hoping, all else failed, I would come to the Rebbe and he would be able to help me." So the Razah says, "Okay." So he goes into his brother and he says, "If you're being Rebbe, you got to play by the rules. You can't just send somebody out and tell them you can't help them. That's not how it works." So the Rebbe Rashab says, "Okay," and he puts on his hat and his gartel. Says, "Send him back in. Take 2." Take 2. The guy comes in, and he again tells the Rebbe what he wants, and the Rebbe gives him a bracha for whatever it was, and of course the bracha becomes mukuyim, and they lived happily ever after. What's the message of the story? What's going on?
The guy needed help to cry.
The Rebbe Rashab comes in the first time. The Rebbe Rashab sees that he hasn't yet reached the depth of his sincerity in davening to Hashem for this matter. The Rebbe Hashem tells him, I can't help you. That's what pushed him over the cliff, to really reach out to Hashem in the most deepest possible way. Like we say on the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, that Chana's voice is not heard. She's reaching out to Hashem in the deepest possible way, in such a deep way that cannot be expressed verbally, that cannot be expressed in an audible voice. Once he was able to reach that, then the Rebbe Shabbat says, okay, now you could come back in and I could give you a bracha.
I love this story.
Says the Rebbe, we need to confuse the Satan. What do we need to do to confuse the Satan? We need to make sure that we do such a strong tshuva in Chodesh Elul, so that come Rosh Hashanah, we've already succeeded in our court, in our judgment. So how do we start off by doing it? By arousing ourselves to tshuva already from the beginning of Elul. Comes Erev Rosh Hashanah, Atat, you know what? We pull that crutch away from you. We're taking away the shofar from you. We're taking away blessing Rosh Chodesh. We're taking away finishing V'zoi Sabracha. All these external things which are going to sort of trigger you and get you in the mood of Rosh Hashanah, we're taking them all away. Now you're going to feel complete. I can't do this. You're going to feel helpless, and right, that feeling of helplessness is what is going to push you over the cliff to really reach out and do teshuvah from the depth of your heart, and then, boy, will the Satan get confused, because you'll already be confirmed, written, the Sefer Tzadikim L'chaim Tovim for a wonderful year.
Amen.
Because it's a Shir Halacha, we could finish off with another couple of halachic snippets. So first of all, another reason for Tkiyah Shofar in Elul, which I found very interesting, is brought down from there is a Ruah, and I think it's brought down already in the Maharam Rotenberg also, that it's pasha to practice, just like before every Yom Tov, 30 days before you start learning the halacha. So 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, you need to start practicing shofar. So you might say, well, maybe that's only for the person blowing shofar. What do I need to do? But okay, so the minhag is everybody does it. Now we mentioned earlier that there's a discussion about when to start. Do you start on the first day of Rosh Chodesh or the second day of Rosh Chodesh? So part of the discussion is that you're supposed to start 40 days before Yom Kippur. Now, the first day of Rosh Chodesh is 40 days before Yom Kippur, so that's the basis to start the first day. The second day of Rosh Chodesh is only 39 days before. However, it's brought down that the year that Moshe Rabbeinu went up, that year there was 30 days of Elul. So we, on our calendar, we only have 29 days of Elul. But that year there was 30 days of Elul, and so the second day of Rosh Chodesh turned out to be 40 days before Yom Kippur. And so that's why some people have the custom to start on the second day of Rosh Chodesh, some people have the custom to start on the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and the Chabad custom is kind of a pshara where we start on the second day of Rosh Chodesh, but already on the first day of Rosh Chodesh we take out the shofar and blow some practice blows, so that we're not sort of officially blowing shofar yet, but we're already doing some practice. It's interesting. It's interesting to think that perhaps. Mitzad, in other words, why are we starting on Rosh Chodesh? So we said the normal reason is because 40 days before Yom Kippur, that's when you're supposed to start. Good. So 40 days before Yom Kippur that year, the year that Moshe Rabbeinu went, was the second day of Rosh Chodesh. The second day of Rosh Chodesh, that's why we start blowing second day of Rosh Chodesh. But besides all those spiritual reasons to blow shofar, there's also the halachic reason to blow shofar from the Rizarua and the Maram Rotenberg that you're supposed to practice. When he starts to start practicing, 30 days before Yom Tov. 30 days before Yom Tov has to be the first day of Rosh Chodesh. So it could be that the Chabad minhag lines up really nicely because Chabad is the best. So so it lines up nicely with all the different reasons. One more interesting thing to point out is I told you before, why don't we blow shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah? To confuse the Satan. But there's also another reason brought that you don't blow shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah so that you have a proper divide between the customary blows and the obligatory blows. So you make a day in between where you're like, we're finished, and now Rosh Hashanah, that's a new thing, it's all the same. Now, what's the practical difference between these two reasons? Why not blowing shofar in Erev Rosh Hashanah? Either to confuse the Satan or to differentiate between the blow. So the difference is, what about if you need to blow to practice for Rosh Hashanah? So if you're trying to confuse the Satan, so then the way some poskim say, again, this doesn't really fit with the Rebbe's approach to confusing the Satan, but perhaps with a more traditional sense of literally confusing him. Well, if you blow shofar even just to practice in Rosh Hashanah, now that's not going to confuse him enough. So. But I'm not sure exactly. It depends which approach you take to confuse the Satan. But if it's mitzad separating between the halach, the obligatory and the optional blows. So then, if you're not blowing in the sense of blowing as a ceremony, you're just blowing to practice. So then, that's not a problem. So l'maisa, that's how we paskin, that if a person needs to practice for Rosh Hashanah, he is allowed to practice on Erev Rosh Hashanah, but he should do so in private, not in public, in shul
setting.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stop over here, and we should all have a good Kibben Shtiar. And Miyetz Hashem, next week, the topic of the shir will be the minhag of saying L'David Oiri for the duration of Elul and most of Tishrei.